The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Special Agent Maya Rivers had just finished a long day at work and was now parked by the curb, taking a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her secure line, a routine check-in with her team about an ongoing investigation. As she answered the call, her focus remained calm and professional, just as it always was. What she didn't know was that this ordinary evening would soon spiral into something extraordinary. A few minutes passed before Maya noticed movement in her rearview mirror. A police cruiser had pulled up behind her car, its headlights glaring brightly. At first, she thought nothing of it. Cops patrolled neighborhoods all the time. But when the officer stepped out without turning on their flashing lights or sirens, Maya's instincts kicked in. Something felt off. The officer approached her window with slow, deliberate steps. It was Karen Hargrove, a name familiar to locals for her reputation of making questionable traffic stops, especially targeting people of color. Maya kept her composure, lowering her window slightly as Karen leaned in. Before Maya could say anything, Karen barked, "License and registration." Her tone was sharp, almost accusatory. Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "Officer, is there a reason I've been stopped?" she asked politely. She reached up to adjust her FBI badge, which hung prominently around her neck. The golden emblem gleamed faintly in the fading sunlight, impossible to miss. Yet Karen seemed uninterested in the badge. Instead, she squinted suspiciously at Maya, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're impersonating a federal officer," Karen snapped, ignoring the clear insignia of authority hanging right in front of her. Maya blinked, momentarily stunned. Was this really happening? She tried again, speaking slowly and clearly. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Maya Rivers with the FBI. This is my badge, and you can verify it if needed." But Karen wasn't listening. Her face hardened further, and she raised her voice. "Step out of the vehicle now." Neighbors began peeking through their curtains, curious about the commotion outside. Some even grabbed their phones to record what was unfolding. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach, not out of fear, but frustration. How could someone blatantly disregard such obvious proof of her identity? Despite the absurdity of the situation, Maya complied. She stepped out of her car, hands visible, her movements calm and measured. Every second felt surreal, like watching a scene play out in slow motion. Karen's demeanor only grew more aggressive as she ordered Maya to place her hands on the hood of the car. The cool metal pressed against Maya's palms, and she closed her eyes briefly, reminding herself to stay composed. Losing her temper wouldn't help. Staying calm might. As Karen slapped handcuffs onto Maya's wrists, muttering something about resisting, anger simmered beneath Maya's surface, but so did determination. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than one reckless officer. This was about every person who'd ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. And as Karen shoved her into the back of the patrol car, Maya resolved to turn this injustice into something meaningful. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a story that would captivate the nation. The ride to the police station was tense and suffocating. Maya sat in the backseat of the patrol car, her hands cuffed behind her back, staring out the window as familiar streets rolled by. Her mind raced, replaying every detail of what had just happened. She couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated from a routine traffic stop to an unlawful arrest. Karen's refusal to acknowledge her identity, even with her FBI badge clearly visible, was infuriating. But Maya knew better than to let her emotions take control. This wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the systemic flaws that allowed situations like this to happen. As they pulled into the precinct parking lot, Maya noticed neighbors gathering on sidewalks, whispering among themselves. Some held their phones up, recording the scene. One woman even shouted, "What's going on? Why are you arresting her?" But Karen ignored them all, marching Maya inside without explanation. The fluorescent lights of the station buzzed overhead as Maya was led to a booking desk. Her presence caused a stir among the officers on duty, who exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Karen began barking orders at the desk sergeant, accusing Maya of impersonating a federal agent and resisting arrest. Charges that were laughable given the circumstances. Maya remained silent, her jaw clenched tightly. She didn't want to give anyone more ammunition to twist her words later. Instead, she observed everything. The names on badges, the dismissive shrugs of other officers, the way no one questioned Karen's version of events. It was clear this wasn't the first time something like this had happened here. Meanwhile, outside the station, the crowd grew larger. A neighbor who had recorded the initial confrontation uploaded the video to social media, where it spread like wildfire. Comments poured in, condemning Karen's actions and expressing outrage over the blatant disregard for Maya's credentials. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #RacistKarenCop began trending within minutes. Calls started flooding the precinct from concerned citizens demanding answers. Even high-ranking officials within the FBI caught wind of the incident and sprang into action. Back inside, Maya was finally placed in a holding cell. The cold metal bench pressed against her legs as she sat down, her thoughts swirling. Despite the humiliation of being locked up unjustly, she felt a strange sense of calm. She knew this moment could either break her or become a catalyst for change, and she refused to let it break her. Pulling herself together, she requested access to make a phone call, citing her rights as a federal agent. At first, Karen tried to block her, but the growing pressure from outside made it impossible to deny her any longer. When the phone was handed to her, Maya dialed not a lawyer, but her direct superior at FBI headquarters. Her voice was steady as she explained the situation, emphasizing the need for immediate intervention. Within an hour, federal agents arrived at the precinct, their presence commanding respect. They demanded answers, flashing their own badges, and making it clear that this wasn't just some local dispute. It was a matter of national importance. As the gravity of the situation dawned on Karen and her colleagues, panic set in. What had seemed like a routine abuse of power was now spiraling out of their control. For Maya, though, this was only the beginning. She knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The entire country was watching, and she intended to use that attention to shine a light on the injustices so many others had faced in silence. With each passing minute, her resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was everyone's story. And she was determined to make sure it ended with justice served. The video of Maya's arrest spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across social media platforms and news outlets. Within hours, the footage had millions of views, with people sharing it faster than anyone could keep track. Comments flooded in from all corners of the country, some expressing disbelief, others recounting their own experiences of racial profiling or unfair treatment by law enforcement. The #JusticeForMaya trended not only locally but nationally, drawing attention from influential figures, activists, and even lawmakers. The sheer volume of support was overwhelming, both for Maya personally and for the broader issue her case highlighted. At the precinct, officers scrambled to contain the chaos as phone lines lit up nonstop. Calls poured in from concerned citizens demanding answers, civil rights organizations offering legal assistance, and reporters clamoring for statements. Even high-ranking officials within the FBI were calling, outraged that one of their own agents had been treated this way. The pressure mounted so quickly that Karen and her colleagues began exchanging nervous glances, realizing they might have bitten off more than they could chew. Outside the station, the scene grew increasingly tense. Neighbors who had witnessed the arrest gathered alongside strangers who had seen the video online. Some held signs reading "End Racial Profiling" and "Stand with Maya," while others chanted slogans about justice and accountability. Reporters arrived with cameras rolling, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. The energy in the air was electric, a mix of anger, solidarity, and determination. For many, this wasn't just about Maya. It was about every person who had ever been wrongfully targeted because of their race. Inside the holding cell, Maya remained calm despite the storm brewing around her. She could hear the commotion outside, the chants, the honking of car horns, the murmur of voices growing louder by the minute. Though she couldn't see what was happening, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It had become a rallying cry for communities tired of being silenced and dismissed. Every cheer from the crowd outside fueled her resolve. She knew she had to channel this momentum into something meaningful, something that would create lasting change. As federal agents arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Dressed in crisp suits and carrying official credentials, they exuded authority and demanded immediate access to Maya. Their presence sent a clear message. This wasn't just a local matter. It was now under federal scrutiny. Officers at the station exchanged panicked whispers, unsure how to handle the sudden escalation. Karen, once so confident in her actions, looked visibly shaken as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. Meanwhile, the live streams continued uninterrupted, with viewers glued to their screens. Social media users dissected every detail of the incident, pointing out inconsistencies in Karen's behavior and highlighting Maya's professionalism throughout. Memes mocking Karen's overreach began circulating, further amplifying the ridicule she faced. But beneath the humor lay a deeper sentiment, a collective demand for accountability and reform. By the time Maya was finally released from the holding cell, escorted by federal agents, the world was watching. As she stepped outside, blinking in the bright lights of cameras and cheers from supporters, she paused for a moment. The weight of the moment hit her, not just the injustice she had endured, but the opportunity it presented. This wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless against systemic racism. And as she raised her head high, flanked by those determined to stand with her, Maya knew exactly what came next, a fight for justice that would resonate far beyond this single night. The investigation into Maya's arrest quickly snowballed into something far bigger than anyone had anticipated. What started as a routine inquiry into one officer's misconduct soon revealed cracks in the foundation of the entire police department. Federal investigators, working alongside internal affairs, uncovered a troubling pattern. Karen Hargrove wasn't an isolated case of poor judgment. She was part of a systemic problem that had festered for years. Reports surfaced of other officers turning a blind eye to racial profiling, falsifying evidence, and dismissing complaints from minority communities. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Karen, once so confident in her authority, found herself drowning in scrutiny. Her actions during Maya's arrest were dissected under a microscope, with experts pointing out glaring violations of protocol at every turn. For starters, she had ignored clear identification, proving Maya's status as a federal agent, a move that defied basic common sense, let alone police procedure. Worse still, bodycam footage showed Karen escalating the situation unnecessarily, barking orders, and making accusations without cause. The video became Exhibit A in the growing case against her, shared widely by news outlets and social media users alike. As damning evidence piled up, public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside the precinct daily, holding signs that read "Accountability now" and "No more Karens in uniform." Local activists organized rallies, drawing crowds numbering in the thousands. Even people who didn't typically engage in political issues joined the movement, inspired by Maya's story and the broader call for justice. Celebrities and influencers amplified the message online, ensuring the story stayed in the national spotlight. It was impossible to ignore the groundswell of demand for change. Meanwhile, Maya took a bold step that surprised even her closest allies. Rather than focusing solely on punishing Karen, she expanded her legal battle to include a class action lawsuit on behalf of all victims of racial profiling within the city over the past decade. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about holding the entire system accountable. With support from top-tier civil rights attorneys and advocacy groups, Maya filed the lawsuit, naming not only Karen but also the police department as defendants. The goal was clear: secure justice for those who had been silenced, and push for sweeping reforms to prevent future abuses. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the community. For many residents, especially people of color, it was validation, a recognition that their experiences mattered and deserved attention. Stories began pouring in from individuals who had endured similar mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. A young man recounted being pulled over repeatedly for no reason. A mother described how officers dismissed her son's disappearance because he fit the profile. Each story added fuel to the fire, reinforcing the urgent need for change. Karen, meanwhile, became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority. Once shielded by her badge, she now faced intense personal consequences. Her name trended online, often accompanied by scathing memes and hashtags like #KarenMustGo. Friends distanced themselves, and neighbors whispered disapprovingly whenever she ventured out in public. Stripped of her usual bravado, Karen appeared increasingly rattled, knowing her career and reputation were hanging by a thread. For Maya, this was more than vindication, it was empowerment. She had turned what could have been a moment of defeat into a catalyst for transformation. By amplifying her voice through collective action, she ensured that her fight wouldn't end with one bad officer losing their job. This was about dismantling the structures that allowed such injustices to thrive in the first place. As the lawsuit gained traction and the calls for reform grew louder, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. Months after the whirlwind of events that began with her wrongful arrest, Maya Rivers found herself standing at a podium in a packed congressional hearing room. The walls were adorned with American flags, and rows of lawmakers sat before her, pens in hand, ready to listen. Cameras flashed as reporters leaned forward, eager to capture every word she said. This was the moment Maya had been building toward, a chance to speak directly to those in power about the urgent need for police reform. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she began her testimony. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said, pausing to look each lawmaker in the eye. "It chose me the night I was arrested simply because of the color of my skin. But what happened to me wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that has gone on for far too long." She recounted the details of her arrest, not to dwell on her own pain, but to highlight how easily systemic racism could infiltrate even the most trusted institutions. Her words carried weight, not just because of her personal experience, but because they represented the voices of countless others who had suffered in silence. Maya's testimony struck a chord. Lawmakers nodded solemnly, some visibly moved by her story. One senator openly praised her courage, calling her a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. Another pledged to introduce legislation aimed at increasing accountability within law enforcement, citing Maya's advocacy as inspiration. By the end of the hearing, there was a palpable sense of momentum, a recognition that change was not only necessary but possible. The class action lawsuit Maya spearheaded also reached a landmark settlement. The city agreed to allocate millions of dollars to fund community programs designed to rebuild trust between law enforcement and minority populations. These funds would support youth mentorship initiatives, conflict resolution workshops, and independent oversight boards tasked with reviewing misconduct allegations. For many plaintiffs involved in the case, the settlement wasn't just financial compensation. It was validation. Their stories mattered, and their suffering had contributed to something greater than themselves. Beyond policy changes, Maya's impact rippled through society in ways she hadn't anticipated. Young activists rallied around her mission, organizing marches, educational campaigns, and voter registration drives focused on criminal justice reform. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #FollowMayasLead and #ChangeStartsWithUs, encouraging people to take action in their own communities. Even schools incorporated her story into curriculums, teaching students about resilience, advocacy, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Karen Hargrove, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. Stripped of her badge and credibility, she struggled to find work or rebuild her life. Her downfall served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked power and prejudice came with consequences. While some may have felt sympathy for her plight, most agreed that accountability was long overdue. Her name became shorthand for institutional racism, used in discussions about why systemic change was so desperately needed. For Maya, the journey was transformative, not just professionally, but personally. She had entered this battle as a victim of injustice, but emerged as a leader and symbol of hope. Yet she never lost sight of the bigger picture. In interviews and speeches, she consistently redirected praise to the collective effort behind the movement. "This isn't about me," she often said. "It's about all of us working together to create a future where everyone is treated fairly." As time passed, Maya continued her advocacy, knowing the fight for equality was ongoing. She mentored young activists, advised policymakers, and remained a vocal advocate for reform. Though scars from that fateful night lingered, they reminded her of how far she, and the nation, had come. Maya's story proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's courage could ignite a movement capable of changing the world. And as she looked out at crowds chanting her name, she knew the legacy of her fight would endure for generations to come. Maya's release from the precinct marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test her patience, strategy, and resolve. As she walked out into the night, surrounded by federal agents and greeted by chants of support from the crowd, she made a deliberate choice: silence. While others might have been quick to speak out, vent their anger, or demand answers on the spot, Maya understood the power of restraint. Every word spoken in haste could be twisted, misinterpreted, or used against her later. Instead, she let her actions, and the overwhelming public outcry, speak for themselves. Inside the precinct, federal agents took charge, demanding access to records, bodycam footage, and any evidence related to Maya's arrest. They grilled officers about protocol violations, procedural lapses, and Karen's refusal to acknowledge Maya's credentials despite clear proof of her identity. Meanwhile, Maya stood quietly, observing everything with a sharp eye. She noted badge numbers, listened carefully to conversations, and mentally catalogued every detail that could strengthen her case. Her silence wasn't passive. It was calculated, strategic, and powerful. Back at home later that night, Maya sat alone in her living room, replaying the events in her mind. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a mix of emotions: frustration, exhaustion, but also determination. She knew this incident wasn't just about her. It was symbolic of a much larger issue. Countless others had faced similar injustices without the platform or resources to fight back. Maya realized she had an opportunity, not just to seek justice for herself, but to shine a light on systemic racism within law enforcement and push for real change. Her first move was to call her direct superior again, this time requesting a formal investigation into the incident. She emphasized the importance of transparency, not only for her sake, but for the sake of all victims of racial profiling. "This can't be swept under the rug," she said firmly. "If we don't address this now, it'll happen again, to someone else, somewhere else." Her words resonated deeply, prompting immediate action from higher-ups within the FBI. The next morning, as news outlets dissected every angle of the story, Maya decided to take another bold step. She filed a formal complaint against Karen and the department involved. This wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. It was about exposing the culture that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. Maya worked closely with civil rights attorneys to ensure her complaint was airtight, citing specific violations of both federal law and police conduct codes. She also requested an independent review of the department's practices, knowing full well that internal investigations often lacked teeth. Throughout this process, Maya continued to avoid media interviews or public statements. Her silence became its own form of strength, allowing the facts to speak louder than any emotional response could. Reporters camped outside her house, hoping for a soundbite, but Maya remained steadfast. She focused instead on gathering evidence, consulting with legal experts, and planning her next moves strategically. As days turned into weeks, The pressure on Karen and her colleagues intensified. Internal Affairs launched an inquiry into the arrest, while federal investigators dug deeper into patterns of misconduct within the department. Neighbors who had witnessed the incident came forward to corroborate Maya's account, adding credibility to her claims. Even fellow officers began speaking out anonymously, revealing long-standing concerns about Karen's behavior and the lack of accountability within the force. For Maya, the journey was far from over, but she felt a quiet confidence growing inside her. By choosing silence over outrage, preparation over impulsiveness, and strategy over emotion, she had taken control of the narrative. And as she prepared to escalate her fight even further, she knew one thing for certain. Her voice, though quiet for now, would soon echo across the nation, demanding justice not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system meant to protect them. The downfall of Karen Hargrove unfolded like a slow-motion collapse, with each revelation chipping away at her credibility and career. Internal investigations uncovered not only her role in Maya's wrongful arrest, but also years of unchecked misconduct. Former colleagues came forward, detailing instances where Karen had falsified reports to justify unnecessary stops and arrests, often targeting people of color. Complaints filed against her by citizens, many of which had been ignored or buried, resurfaced, painting a damning portrait of an officer who abused her power without consequence. Public hearings added fuel to the fire. During one particularly explosive session, a former subordinate testified that Karen routinely mocked minority communities, referring to them with derogatory slurs during briefings. The testimony shocked even seasoned investigators, further eroding any remaining support for her within the department. Media outlets seized on the details, amplifying the narrative that Karen wasn't just a rogue officer. She was emblematic of a toxic culture embedded in law enforcement. As evidence mounted, the city council convened an emergency meeting to address the growing scandal. Public pressure was relentless, with thousands gathering outside the municipal building, chanting slogans like "Fire Karen now" and "Justice starts here." Inside, council members debated whether to terminate her employment immediately or allow due process to play out. But the sheer volume of evidence and the risk of appearing complicit in shielding her left them little choice. In a unanimous vote, they stripped Karen of her badge, ending her career in law enforcement. Stripped of her authority and reputation, Karen became a pariah. Once celebrated as a tough enforcer of the law, she was now vilified as a symbol of everything wrong with policing. Friends distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, embarrassed to be linked to someone whose name had become synonymous with racism and incompetence. Even her family struggled under the weight of public scorn, retreating from social circles and avoiding interviews. For Karen, the fall from grace was swift, humiliating, and irreversible. But Maya understood that removing one bad actor wasn't enough. Firing Karen might have been satisfying, but it didn't address the root causes of systemic racism within law enforcement. To truly make a difference, Maya shifted her focus toward advocating for lasting reforms. She worked tirelessly with advocacy groups, lawmakers, and community leaders to push for sweeping changes in police practices. Mandatory bias training, independent oversight boards, and increased transparency in disciplinary actions topped her list of priorities. Her efforts bore fruit when local officials announced plans to implement many of these reforms. The city allocated funds to establish an independent review board tasked with investigating complaints against officers. Training programs were revamped to emphasize cultural sensitivity and de-escalation tactics. Officers found guilty of misconduct faced stricter penalties, including permanent dismissal for repeat offenders. These measures weren't perfect, but they represented a significant step forward, a testament to what could be achieved when people united for justice. Maya also turned her attention to inspiring others to join the fight. She traveled across the country, speaking at rallies, schools, and community events. Her speeches were powerful yet relatable, blending personal anecdotes with calls to action. She reminded audiences that change required persistence, that victories, no matter how small, were worth celebrating because they added up over time. Her message resonated deeply, especially with young activists eager to carry the torch. By this point, Maya's story had transcended headlines. It had become a beacon of hope for marginalized communities, proof that resilience and determination could challenge even the most entrenched systems of oppression. While Karen's downfall marked a victory, Maya knew the work was far from over. Systemic racism couldn't be dismantled overnight. It would take sustained effort, vigilance, and unity. And though the journey ahead remained daunting, Maya stood ready to lead the charge, proving that courage and conviction could spark transformative change. The class action lawsuit filed by Maya Rivers became a turning point not just for her case, but for the entire movement against systemic racism in law enforcement. It was no ordinary legal battle. It was a declaration that enough was enough. The lawsuit named Karen Hargrove and the police department as defendants, accusing them of perpetuating racial profiling and failing to hold officers accountable for discriminatory practices. But what made it truly groundbreaking was its scope. It sought justice not just for Maya, but for every individual who had ever been targeted unfairly because of their race. Maya's decision to expand the fight beyond her personal experience resonated deeply with communities across the country. Victims of racial profiling came forward in droves, sharing their stories and joining the lawsuit. A young college student recounted being stopped multiple times while driving through affluent neighborhoods, simply because he didn't belong. A grandmother described how officers dismissed her grandson's wrongful arrest without apology or explanation. Each story added weight to the case, painting a vivid picture of the harm caused by unchecked bias within law enforcement. The media played a crucial role in amplifying these voices. News outlets dedicated hours of coverage to the lawsuit, interviewing plaintiffs, legal experts, and activists. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #SystemicChangeNow and #JusticeForAll, keeping the conversation alive and ensuring widespread awareness. Influencers and public figures lent their platforms to the cause, urging people to educate themselves about racial inequality and support efforts for reform. The momentum grew so strong that lawmakers began taking notice, promising to introduce legislation aimed at increasing accountability in policing. Karen Hargrove, once shielded by her badge, now found herself at the center of a national reckoning. Internal investigations revealed a long history of questionable behavior, including falsified reports and ignored complaints from citizens. Former colleagues, emboldened by the growing outcry, started speaking out against her conduct. Some admitted they had known about her discriminatory actions, but feared retaliation if they reported her. Others expressed regret for staying silent, acknowledging their complicity in allowing such behavior to continue unchecked. As pressure mounted, Karen's life unraveled. She was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, effectively stripping her of her authority. Her name became synonymous with institutional racism, mocked in memes, and ridiculed in late-night talk shows. Friends distanced themselves, and neighbors avoided her, leaving her isolated and humiliated. For someone who had once wielded power with impunity, the fall from grace was swift and devastating. Meanwhile, Maya remained focused on the bigger picture. She understood that removing one bad actor wasn't enough. The system itself needed to change. To that end, she partnered with advocacy groups to push for policy reforms at both local and federal levels. Mandatory bias training for officers, independent oversight boards to review misconduct allegations, and increased transparency in disciplinary actions were among the key changes she championed. These proposals gained traction quickly, fueled by public demand for meaningful solutions. By this point, Maya's courage had made her a symbol of resilience and hope. People admired not only her determination, but also her ability to channel anger into action. She traveled to rallies and community meetings, listening to those affected by racial injustice and encouraging them to keep fighting. Her message was simple yet powerful. Real change requires collective effort. No single person could dismantle systemic racism alone. But together, they could create a future where fairness and equality weren't just ideals, but realities. As the lawsuit progressed, anticipation built around its potential outcomes. Legal experts predicted it could set a precedent for holding police departments accountable nationwide. Regardless of the verdict, however, Maya knew the impact would be lasting. She had ignited a movement, one that refused to let the world look away from the injustices faced by marginalized communities. And though the road ahead remained challenging, Maya stood ready to lead the charge, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope and perseverance could spark monumental change.